Today's nonpartisan virtual forum is being hosted by the Milwaukee Turners in partnership with the Japanese American Citizens League of Wisconsin, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Milwaukee, the Jewish Federation, Elevation, and the Milwaukee County Office of Equity. Friends, we're gathered to talk about a very toxic and insidious topic today. In the past 2 years, we've seen incredibly deadly spikes of anti-Asian and anti-Semitic violence and racism. From fatal attacks in spas, buses, and synagogues, to the now deplatformed Tucker Carlson's replacement theory, to the racist and xenophobic frothing over everything from TikTok, banks, media control, and COVID. Even locally, West Allis initially refused to pass a no-teeth resolution condemning anti-Asian hate, and when it finally passed, it wasn't even unanimous. And over in Muskego, they didn't allow Julie Otsuka's book about the Japanese American internment camps in their high schools, claiming it was too sad or some other thinly veiled nonsense. As people invested in the ideal of a robust and equitable democracy, it's important to educate ourselves and make informed stands. Thank you for joining us at the Phillips Forum.
Hi, my name is Elsie Crawford, and I run the Repairing Together project. The last 6 years, 2 years on my own, and the last 4 under the Milwaukee Jewish Day School. We combine students from the Indian Community School, Milwaukee Jewish Day School, Bruce Guadalupe, which is predominantly Latino, and Dr. Martin Luther King Elementary School. And we do all kinds of fun programs together from K4 through 8th. We serve 1,065 students per year. We offer programming free of charge to all participating schools, and we hope to share the method nationally with other schools elsewhere, and so that the students predominantly can learn about each other's celebrations. We celebrate differences because we like that we're different. We're comfortable being different. But at least that the kids learn to understand each other, celebrate our holidays, our foods, and also learn about our histories, because apparently that's not being taught anywhere. And if we're lucky, we get a month somewhere in the year. Even though everybody's American, it's not integrated in American curriculum in schools, and well, that's good for starters.
That's great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paula Phillips. I'm the interim director for the Office of Equity at Milwaukee County. The Office of Equity is on nonstop to make sure that we are meeting the county's vision of becoming the healthiest county in Wisconsin by achieving racial equity. So we really focus on thinking about how we do that when it comes to changing, shifting policy, practices, and different power structures that we're a part of. So being a department in the county, we work directly with county leaders in departments to really think about how they're allocating resources, how they're better connecting with community, directly with grassroots leaders to understand what are the felt needs here in Milwaukee County. How can we be of assistance, whether it's in marketing or sharing or providing financial resources while they're available. And then lastly, with power structures, really having, if you look to, if you Google Milwaukee County vision, on that webpage you'll see a model of what we really think about what will need to happen if we were to achieve our vision. So really thinking about how power works within the county and how we make decisions, how resources are allocated, how we're working together or not, what information is shared or not, and being as transparent as possible with our stakeholders so that we can co-create solutions and tackling some of these biggest problems.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Bernstein. I'm the Associate Director for the Jewish Community Relations Council of Milwaukee Jewish Federation. And I'll just keep it really simple. We exist to help make sure that the Jewish community can be safe and thrive in our community. And we know that we can only be safe and thrive when all groups in Milwaukee County can, and our greater area, can be safe and thrive. And so all of our activities stem from that. We do this through education, we do this through advocacy, and most importantly, we do this through relationship building. For example, one of our partnerships that really was the birth of this program today came from our AAPI Jewish Alliance. And so really grateful for the opportunity. My other hat is that I am the vice president for the Fox Point Bayside School District, so I have that lens to use too as we approach the topic.
Hello, I'm Ron Kuramoto. I'm president of the Japanese American Citizens League Wisconsin chapter. I am not Representative Francesca Hmong, for those of you here to see her. She got a call from the White House earlier this week to come because the South Korean president is there, and they just didn't send mine, so I'm here in her place. But the JACL has been around since 1929. It's the oldest Asian American organization which is national and works for civil rights and social justice. The most notable thing after its founding was dealing with the whole incarceration of 125,283 Americans of Japanese descent, 2/3 of which were U.S. citizens without due process. We've since been involved with a variety of other social justice programs as well, and we're delighted to be here and join my colleagues at the opening of AAPI Heritage Month and Jewish Heritage Month.
That's excellent. Thank you all. I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of us. We're all very grateful to have such a knowledgeable and concerned and committed panel of experts. So, too often it seems that the stories of traditionally marginalized peoples are often rooted in the negative. The tragedies, for example, reducing Jewish history to only the Holocaust, or Japanese American history to only American incarceration, or the life of one or two archetypal leaders. For example, limiting black accomplishments in America to the lives of Dr. MLK Jr. and Rosa Parks. Intentionally or otherwise, Americans are not learning the historic and current contributions of literally millions of people. See, they're trying to stop us even now from teaching the history. So we'd love to know how your organizations are prepared to help us do better. How do we build a more inclusive education? And I'm not going to finger point. I was a teacher. I will leave it to you to self-volunteer whether you choose to answer or not. But I will stare uncomfortably at Ron from time to time.
I see. Well, actually, I am most interested, of my colleagues up here on the panel, I know the least of Elsie's program. I'd like to hear about some of the work that you do.
We more and more let our students lead the way, because that's one of the best perks of our program, that I get to be taught by the students. We give them more and more power to, especially in middle school, because all our schools have a red thread that, yeah, there was a lot of atrocities and genocide and lots of mayhem, but we all survived, and what does that mean now? And what does it mean looking beyond the atrocities? So we have asked our 7th grade students, what would you like to teach about the Holocaust to your peers? What is important to you that they know? So our 7th graders entered into a program with the students of the Indian Community School in Franklin, that they taught them about the Holocaust from their perspective. And the Indian community students, they taught about boarding schools, which is also not being taught generally in schools. And then they had this conversation like, oh my gosh, we have a lot of common history, that there are a lot of bad things happen to our peoples, but we survived, and what does that mean, and how do you go on? And I think Dara Horn said it better, was it last week in the Atlantic, that teaching about the Holocaust actually can have a negative effect, because you see it as one thing, but the story before that led up to it is 2,000 years of persecution in every European country, and also later on here. And that goes for all the minorities that we work with, all the groups. They have a similar story, and if you don't see it in the historical context, then you don't create empathy or understanding, but more like, oh, there you have the Jews again with the Holocaust. We've heard the story now, and I think that's kind of counterproductive if you don't tell the whole story. And we have beautiful stories to tell. So yes, we touch a lot upon traditions, literature, art, ecology and environment. What kind of community do our students want to live in later? How can they become good friends, good neighbors, good citizens, and how can they advocate for each other? Does that answer your question a bit, Ron?
And we'll open it up and we'll let other folks also talk about.
Yes. Thank you. I don't, would you like to just sort of go down the line, or how would you like to do this?
Oh, I appreciate Elsie's context, and I think in terms of best practice, something that I previously served on the Milwaukee Public School Board, something that both myself and my colleagues really cared about and thought about was how are we presenting materials to students that they want to engage in and that they could have sort of this self-directed learning. And I think that that's really important, and it also needs to be, to your point about context, really brought into the context of, what is the learning environment, and is it in itself actually conducive to learning in our culture right now. So whether or not you have culturally responsive text, whether or not you're teaching a fuller history of the United States, it doesn't really matter if students can't read. It doesn't really matter if students don't have those critical thinking skills. And I really appreciate how you outlined what I heard when you were talking was by the time that somebody's in 7th grade, they actually have not just comprehension, but can also share and engage in sort of critical conversations around, how societies have been built and what does it mean for us in the society that we're building. So, I think that history gives us a lot of context of how society's been built in the past and what's happening right now. But it's really important, I think, in an educational context that we have environments where children can actually get to the point of imagining what could be, and that's really tough. And I think for someone that, grew up in an immigrant home, the idea of representation, that I think that's like a saying around representation matters, and but like representation in itself can't be the end goal, right? Like representation matters so that I am seen in some of the comments that you spoke about earlier in the fullness of humanity, right? And it's the ability to other and the ability to say that this group is like me, therefore they are worthy of basic needs. This group is not like me, and if they're not like me, that means I should be scared of them, or I shouldn't tolerate them. I should make them like me so that they're better off, because being like me means that they're being better off. There are all of these things that are subcategories of how do we approach somebody that is not like us. And in our context within the county, because we live in, and most of us live in segregated neighborhoods and segregated areas, there are so many reinforcing ideas around that other. So schools are an intervention point to make students have the opportunity to think about it differently, but it's not a standalone, it's not an end-all, right?
Yeah, I would build off that to say that a lot of times we do start to get involved with schools using an anti-Semitic incident as an opportunity for learning. And at that point, we can connect schools with resources, whether they're in the community or online. We have Jewish Museum Milwaukee as part of our Milwaukee Jewish Federation that offers school tours. And they also, if you can't get out of school to get into the building, there's virtual resources also. We know that kids are really curious about difference. We know that kids notice differences. And if we don't intentionally teach them and teach them how to talk about difference, then there are others lined up that are targeting our kids to teach them things that we don't want them to learn. They will teach our kids about who the Jewish community is in a way that it is not the Jewish community. They're full of conspiracy theories, tropes, et cetera. So we need to fill that vacuum, and that the same is true for all other communities.
One of the priorities for my organization, both the national and our local chapter, is the whole concept of You may have heard of a movement right now that there should be a Parents' Bill of Rights, and many of the school districts and others, and I know as elected school district board members, you have a lot of pressure from others that parents, in some cases that are from a certain ideological bent, mostly right, feel that only certain curriculums should be taught and things like that. And we've experienced that more with the lack of teaching about the Japanese American incarceration and also other things that happen in the Asian American communities. But it also goes down to, I think, the fundamental questions which we've found in looking at the different school districts is the question of belonging. Who belongs, who doesn't belong? And second of all, what are the rights of parents, which seem to be driving a lot of these movements? Now, all of us that are parents, in my opinion, we have the right to say what our child is going to do, where they're going to go, what they need to learn, other things like that. Other people do not have the right to tell all parents and all children what they should learn, what they should read, what they should see, where they should go. And that's kind of the bottom line. That's the crux of a lot of the disputes that are going on right now. And that's we're dealing both on a national and a local level. But I think the hand-to-hand combat is being fought mostly at the school district level.
You all touched upon something that I wanted us to address, which is, Wisconsin's known for these odd groups of folks attempting to censor literature and learning in public schools and libraries. And there is a lot of fear in certain circles over learning anything that's different than their existing identities. People, like we just saw recently with Marjorie Taylor Greene's recent committee hearing comments, are crying words like CRT and degenerate, and or any issues concerning race or LGBTQ status or who knows what. How can we prepare for possible pushback from other people who may be ignorant and fearful and racist? And maybe connected to that, what are the dangers from not teaching Jewish American history or Asian American history? And to connect to something Ron was saying, what are the roles of school boards in this fight? Because all of us have seen playing out in social media and the news these very visceral school board battles. And I'm glad you're on my school board, Andrea.
I can speak to the school board role. All school districts operate somewhat differently. Truthfully, what school boards are intended to do is to supervise the superintendent, who will oversee the day-to-day kind of micro-programming of the school district. And we're seeing a push for, a national push for people to run for school board with very specific agendas about getting involved in curriculum. So that's, in order to do that, we do need more people getting involved, volunteering to run for school board who are generally just interested in supporting public education, their local public schools, and who are interested in being curious, supporting a district where all children feel like they belong and see themselves in the curriculum. If you're not willing to run for school board, for example, our district just had, about a year and a half ago, a community visioning session, and we had people show up from our community that voiced over and over a priority that addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in our district and in our curriculum was a priority. And so that empowered our administrators and our teachers to know that they have the support, and we were able to weave that into our strategic plan. So showing up to events to give that positive input, and also reinforcing when you have teachers, administrators, school board members who are supporting this work, it's really important for them to hear from you that they have support.
Well, I think that fear is the biggest breaker of all things good, as long as fear is involved. And maybe adults should also have a Repairing Together program, but I'm already of a certain age and I won't live to see the results, so children are faster. I think that I never realized that with our program we're doing exactly what the haters don't like, because we just grow organically and let us lead with the schools and the students. But I think if you can involve people in what you do, also in schools, that they always taught things that as parents that you said, oh, is that really something you learn in school? And then you have a conversation, you have a discussion at home about the pros, the cons, what the kids think, what the parents think. So I don't know when all that went out of the window, but I believe that we should engage with people and that we should try to explain, and it's okay to be different. I think that that's the first thing. I don't want to replace anybody. I'm just happy to be here on the planet, and you're welcome to come to my house, come for a meal. And I think that if people just paring it down to something very basic as neighbors, just to reach out and don't start to talk about the heavy stuff. So as soon as they meet me, oh, you're Jewish? What do you think about the Holocaust? And, that's really rough to start off with. Why don't we first start with a coffee and some cakes? That's, I don't know, I'm paring it down probably too simply, but as we are approached on the atrocities of our people, and there's a lot of trauma, we also need to explain to people, yes, I'm from the Netherlands, so my fellow countrymen have committed the worst atrocities in the slave trade. They've done things to Indonesia that still give me stomach cramps. It's not my personal deed. Yes, I feel shame, but I don't need to be responsible. I need to be responsible. How do I treat my fellow human being? How do I become a better person to reach out to those people who were wrong? How can I show that my people has progressed, that we have learned, and that we can do better? You had a program on NPR yesterday about Brits whose family were slave traders, and they said, we are now giving back to organizations, to people. We're not responsible, but we're responsible for how this world will look in another 20 years. And I think that's all we can do.
You know, Ron, I don't know if you want to say a little bit about what happened in Mosquito, because I know you were active with that school.
Well, there is a school district, Muskego Norway School District, and back in June of last year, 2022, they had, let's go back a little further. In April of 2022, they had school board elections, and 3 new school board members were elected on very specific platforms, one of which said critical thinking, not critical race theory. And I mean, that was the platform she ran on, so you can imagine what her ideology is. And those members immediately started going to public committees that dealt with what the school district was teaching. In this case, the Curriculum Development Committee, which reviews all the books and literature that all the K through 12 students in the Muskego Norway School District read. And the way the process usually works is teachers will recommend certain books that they'd like purchased for their classes in the next year as part of the instruction. A 10th grade English teacher had requested a novel, When the Emperor Was Divine, which is a novel, so it's a fictional work, but it's based on work that the author, Julie Otsuka, and her family experienced during World War II, from Berkeley to Topaz, Utah, and back to Berkeley again. And that was among 55 different titles that were being reviewed by this committee, everything from math in 2nd grade to English and others. When it came down to doing recommendations to both, first the superintendent, who then presents it to the school board, there were protests among those new board members as far as that one book, when the emperor was divine, they felt that it was too one-sided. It didn't give the version of, one of the board members commented, well, there has to be a different version to this. You know, why was the U.S. government doing this? And they said there should be more about massacres in Shanghai that Japanese troops had done. And I agree, but that had nothing to do with Japanese Americans here in the United States. And so they pulled that work, and they essentially, it's not currently in the curriculum of Muskego schools. A parent was the one who attended those meetings and flagged that, and then brought it to the attention of other educational groups. It was brought to the attention of my organization, first nationally and then to our chapter. And when we were going to actually address the school board, they refused to let us address there because they said, unless they had put you on the curriculum, you could not speak. And so what was, we put together, and this, I should add that we're part of a larger group, the Asian American AAPI Coalition of Wisconsin, which is of a variety of the Asian Pacific and Desi American groups. We both put together a teach-in where one of the teachers, a former Wisconsin Teacher of the Year, Hmong, in the Verona School District, talked about his own experiences. He also is an English teacher, ironically. We had others from the community, including students from the Muskego School District, talk about the importance of being able to read broadly. And now that they are out of the school district and in college, they realize that without a broader perspective on life, they're really at a disadvantage. The coalition itself, we also purchased and got donations of books and handed out 100 of the books. And I was one of the speakers, and that was the first thing I said. I said, do not read this book. Your school district says you should not read this book, so don't read it. But if you do, there's 100 free copies on the table there. Please feel free. They were all gone by the time we were through, including some of the protesters that were there took some of the free copies. But it's an example of where the school district still does not allow input into it by anybody other than elected school board members, and there's a lot of coercion that is used there, and it's possible to get away with it, unfortunately, at the local school board level, unless in sort of an enlightened citizens and encouraging parents and others to really pay attention to what's going on. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that even though I'm here in place of Francesca Hong, she is sponsoring a bill which is now Assembly Bill 232, Senate Bill 240 in Madison, which has essentially been in committee for 7 years, and it has not gotten out of committee in the Republican legislature. But it responds to an act called Act 31, which was in 1987, mandated that school boards require instructional programs designed to give pupils an understanding of human relations, particularly with regards to American Indians, Black Americans, and Hispanics, unquote. And the bill also directs this bill is asking to include Asian Americans, and in particular Hmong Americans, which are the largest Asian group in Wisconsin, which were deliberately left off for political reasons when the act came up. And that is now going into the hearing stages. There will be hearings during this month of May, this upcoming month of May in Madison, and hope that you would be able to follow some of those things. But that is also part of the result of what's being faced at the local level.
So I'd like to pivot off that and take a deeper dive into a couple of things about ways that we can work together to confront ignorance and hatred. And we'll talk a little about AB 232 and SB 240 and how we can work to support that. But to use a kind of personal metaphor, so earlier this year, the Milwaukee Turners did a deeper dive into our own history. We turned 170 this year. That's a long time to do bad things and good things. So through this deeper dive, we identified and repudiated racist, sexist, ableist, and other negative examples of times that Milwaukee Turners or prominent Turners who were associated with Milwaukee Turners espoused hateful thoughts and actions. And it's not easy work for some of the reasons that Elsie mentioned earlier. And often people have problems reckoning with their past. What are some ways that all of us and all the many people watching online might be able to support a more full and accurate story of American history or our different identities within American history? And what are some ways that we might also be able to help confront ignorance and hatred in addition to some of the things that you brought up?
I'd like to speak to shame is one of the words that's come up a few times. And I think, just like you said, this idea of both and, the good and the bad, we have to approach the entire conversation with the acknowledgement that we're human, we're imperfect, our systems are imperfect, and shame is rarely helpful in helping us to be constructively addressing some of those things. So, I mean, in teaching some of the difficult history, the last thing that I would advocate for is teaching in a way that makes kids feel shame, any kid. So it is important how we do the work, how we approach it, the stance that we take, and how we model the ability. I mean, I can tell you, like, I make mistakes all the time, and I pay attention to this. This is my work, and I have had to grapple with the fact that I'm going to make mistakes, and you can't retreat from them. You have to be able to have approach it with a humility that you can figure out how to rectify whatever wrong you may have done or whatever anything that you may have missaid, and then move forward. And our kids can learn how to do that too. And that's how we work best together. And I think that's how I think we can approach the work.
Even to extend on that, and I love everything you said, even symptomatically, the county is addressing structural symptoms of what we haven't done and structural ways we failed. I'm wondering if, in addition to how we may, as teachers or parents or educators, or even through our own self-reflection as an institution, what are ways that we can address some of these symptoms, or maybe even some of the ways that the county is addressing these?
Sure. So in terms of confronting like ignorance, hatred, fear, something that when the county declared racism as a public health crisis in 2019, different things that have happened since then have been around policy. So reviewing, starting to review specifically within like our personnel policies, like where have there been unintended consequences that might have been blind to how things like race, gender, ability, veteran status have affected the work. Other ways that we've done it has been really thinking about like our own staff. What kind of culture do we have in the county, being that we have 4,000 staff and then even more contractors working with our health department? What are the conversations that they have? What are the mindsets they have when it comes to difference, providing different trainings? Everybody actually goes through substantial, I'm trying to do the quick math in my head, about like two and a half hours of training to really think about through the lens of social determinants of health. So following the story of one family and how their interactions with the COVID-19 crisis, unemployment, interactions with police, interactions with like chronic health and disease and the built environment, and what that really looks like within our county. And something that's publicly facing has been really building out different data dashboards. So in terms of thinking about data as power, like where can we see through different data sets that have been provided through the CDC, through census, that we take on our own, where are there different hotspots for things like reckless driving, and like who does that impact? Where are hotspots for opioid overdoses, and what are the response times? Who does that affect, right? These are things that are happening all over, and bringing to light that these are all things that we feel and we sense, but there are different places where it's hitting most. And I think what's what's unique within the Asian American experience, and in some ways to a Jewish American experience, is how society and conditions present itself so that there are incentives to hide one's identity or to assimilate and to get along, to go along, because of this, what's been seen to happen if you choose to other yourself, right? And there are other, at first I identify as Asian American, but I am somewhat like racially ambiguous. So it's one of those, and my name suggests that, Paula Phillips could be one of many things, white passing, but there's this interesting, I think, internal tension. So something that I think about when I think about confronting that ignorance and hatred is going back to what is my societal experience telling me, like, about, especially for children, like, what's better, right? Like, oh, like, why is this neighborhood, why does my neighborhood look like this versus another neighborhood look like this? Like, why? They're always apt to ask all of these questions, and I don't know if within educational systems, societal structures, we even know how to deal with those questions, because there's a lot of internal unresolved trauma in different communities, that there's so much around just, let's not talk about that, let's just put our head down and move forward. So that's something that I struggle to understand, how we, as people that are concerned about social justice or moving past these things, how do you operationalize that in a system? So instead, I really think about a lot of the work that you're hearing about with Andrea and Elsie. It's like, where are these programs? Like, how are we empowering to parent rights? How are we empowering parents to be able to feel comfortable with their young people around how we have these conversations? How do we provide information around how these structures are built so that we can rebuild them? But I think that history, once again, going back to some of the earlier comments, like, history is a good roadmap for that, but then how do we keep up the energy to build another map? So hopefully that gives you a segue into what's next on things that we can do in terms of...
I think a lot, and I think, and also, friends, this isn't just for me to ask questions. If you have questions, I encourage you to raise your hand to get an index card, and we're curating some questions here online as well. As I'm synthesizing what I'm hearing from the four of you, this confrontation involves not only education, but also some soul searching, right? Like a little self-analysis. And coupled into this educating both our young folks as well as adults. I mean, we saw there are many adults who learned the wrong thing and are boldly going forward with the wrong thing. It's also then using this self-analysis, this soul-searching, to apply to us as individuals, us as institutions, us as larger institutions still, a county, a city, and sometimes re-examining things like, who knows how it manifests in we see horribly the symptoms of what happens when it's wrong. What are some ways, too, that maybe, and I don't know if I'm asking this openly, whether it's a pedagogical question, whether it's just a family question, as a parent myself, as a father of 3 kids and many other quote-unquote adopted kids, how do we begin having these hard questions or these hard discussions about education with our children and with our families?
One of the things that we've found when we're looking at the local level of some of the roots of this, that some of us always experience at some things, is the concept of hate speech. Now, in a previous professional life, I used to do training for the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. And one of the things the ADL used to talk about, which I remember quite clearly, even though it was decades ago, is hate speech does not necessarily lead all the time to genocides, but no genocide starts without hate speech. And I think hate speech is a symptom of some of the things that we're addressing here that we kind of ignore a lot of times. We just say, well, freedom of speech and things like that, but there is a limit at some point. Where do we, and especially in education, and especially as a precursor to anti-Semitic violence, anti-Asian violence, any sort of violence, domestic violence, otherwise, none of them occur without being preceded somehow by some form of hate speech, and it varies from situation to situation. But we're not always talking about elimination theory like Tucker Carlson talks about, which ironically he's been eliminated. But it can be something as they call fighting words, or you're just one of those, or other things like that lead to an escalation in violence and hatred and other things. So we find that a lot of times as a common element at a local level or an individual level.
I have worked with early childhood educators, and I think the first thing, if we're talking about parents, kids need to form positive self-identity, whatever that is. So we start there, and then building outwards, being able to, modeling that we do talk about difference, it's okay to talk about difference, and exploring, getting to know their neighbors, exploring the community, go to the Jewish Museum, that's a great family outing. But most importantly, start somewhere. Just start somewhere, and then make the commitment that it's going to continue, and that you're going to move through bumps, and that's okay, and you don't have to have all the answers, but we have to start somewhere and continue.
Oh. Yeah, I think I agree with everything that you, Andrea, and Ron said. So it's not that hard. It's really simple, I think, as long as the will is there. And we, like Andrea said before, we all make mistakes. I'm very good at them, actually. So that's not the issue, but as long as you put your first foot out there and you show your goodwill. And we started our program 6 years ago with 80 students. I wasn't affiliated with a school. I needed to fundraise to make it approachable for all the schools that we wanted to work with. And now we are up to 1,065 students. It's crazy, it's not logical, but it went from just setting one step behind the other and just see where that takes you. And sometimes it's a really interesting and exciting journey. And it's remarkable that here, now I talk a lot with I'm not an educator myself, as you can tell, but I talk a lot with educators and also out of state, and they said, it does matter that you teach history from the people's mouth whose ancestors lived through it. Just to get an understanding, not to feel that you have to solve all the things that are wrong in the world, but so that you can understand where people are coming from. And also, there's never been any reparations or real apologies to all the peoples who have been wronged, which is a small thing. It's a tiny detail, but it will help with also a sense of self. We're not crazy. These things happen to us. Great, you acknowledge it. Now we can move forward and we can work together and take the fear away from the other, because sometimes with the very hateful speech, it comes from a position of fear, and I never know in what kind of lives those people are. So I also want to be respectful of, I don't walk in their shoes, and I want to be open enough that they feel comfortable to share what they're afraid of and what are their hopes and what do they want for their children. And maybe we can move together to a middle-of-the-road solution, or just let's figure it out together. And that's a bit simple, but working with 4-year-olds is very eye-opening, and they just hold hands, they sing songs, they ask when they see a kid with a yarmulke, why is he wearing that hat? And we say, well, ask him. And then the kid says, yeah, because I'm a Jew. Oh, okay, and that's it. So sometimes we can, learn a lot from the students.
It seems, and I think this every day, it seems like children are far braver and less ashamed of their curiosity than we are. It's almost like adults have embraced this Stockholm syndrome where they're afraid to cast aside their racism or anti-Semitism or whatever stereotypes they think are real, and open up to this curiosity, this bravery, and it's almost like there's it's an endorsement, it's an encouragement saying you don't, mom and dad or neighbor, have to know the answers. You can just look. The fact that we have these powerful supercomputers, right? All of us have them by our side. You can just Google. You can go to the library. You can begin to have a conversation with somebody, and it's not like there is a lack of opportunity really in any city for us to meet someone, maybe in more rural areas, but with a library or a city the size of Milwaukee where there are all these fantastic cultural events for everyone. Go and meet somebody and take that first step and begin learning and unlearning simultaneously. I find what the four of you have said to be inspiring. I'm going to renew my library card. No. Before we open up for questions, I did want to talk about one other very important way that all of us and everyone watching online too can begin to get engaged. Ron addressed briefly these proposed amendments to Act 31, which is Assembly Bill 232 and Senate Bill 240. And I can certainly bore at length everyone with how to go about and make these things done, but I think that this is a really tactile, concrete way that our friends here, our viewers too, can begin to get engaged. Can you speak to some ways that people can make this happen, can contact folks? You know, because many people don't know. How many of you know who, maybe this is the wrong crowd, but how many of you know who your assembly person is? How many of you know who your senate is? All right, that's about 15%. We'll give it 17.5%. What's a way that we can support this passage of something which seems so small a step towards demystifying this otherness? And I can jump in if anybody wants me to.
Well, since that seems to be tailored as a question to me, part of it would be, first of all, I think there is a difference between legislating something and requiring it and actually achieving what you want to do. We all know that there are things that we're told are good for us and we should do, which we don't, or I don't. I shouldn't project that onto you. But and so it's not enough to just sort of require this. And I think a good example is the whole HERC, Holocaust Education Research Center. That was a years-long process to get that put in. And along the way, you have to get compromises along the way, too. It's not just teaching about the Holocaust. It's teaching about other genocides and things like that. And there's a whole process that goes on. But the key point, I think, of these things is, as they said in Watergate, follow the money. If somebody is really serious about getting something done, they'll fund it. And we all know of many things that pass through legislative bodies and perhaps school boards and other things too, that everybody nods their head and says, yes, we should include that, but we're not going to give any money to do it. Well, where do you think that lands on the priority list? The ones who are the boots on the ground, the teachers that actually do that and 100 other things every hour of classroom time. So I think it's important to work on legislative things, but also ask, how are you going to make time and resources available for those things to be conveyed in the classroom to students, to parents, to community members?
Thank you. And that's 100% correct. And also, if you don't know who your legislator is, you can find it out on myvote.wi.gov. You type in your address. And if not this, and it should be this, but if not this, you should all connect with your elected officials, whoever they are, and get to know them and get to harass them, annoy them so that they consider your opinion, or at least they will consider I'm gonna piss off this one. I'm gonna, if I do this thing, I know this person's watching me and they're gonna annoy me. And is the agita worth my just going along with the flow? Let's make them say no. And if you don't know how to contact your elected officials, and if you don't know how to support not only or this Assembly bill or this Senate bill, I will happily tell you, and you can let us know. And we also offer free trainings, which is Democracy 101, and how to contact whatever element of government, city, county, state, federal, what do they do, how to do that. Because the important work that everybody here is doing, I also want to call out my friend and fellow Turner, Reggie Jackson, who also did an incredible presentation. This man deserves to be acknowledged. On addressing some of this originally in what was essentially a one-man masterclass show on confronting the anti-blackness and this false flag of CRT and other things that creeps into our education. So this is yet another symptom of ignorance and hatred. And if we don't tell people to stop, then they won't stop, right?
I just wanted to add, too, I think something that we take for granted, especially for those of us that are involved with Turners or within the AAPI community or the Jewish community, there's that word community that a lot of people do not have. So it's really, I think it sounds so simple. I think Elsie talked about it, Ron, everyone at this table has talked about it, but like, do you know your neighbors? Are you a part of a community group? Because as our institutions continue to whittle away and community feels more evasive, I think that's why there are these sort of strategic targets towards schools, because schools in themselves are communities that the government says your kid has to go to school. So it's like, well, if our kid has to go to school, what's being put out there? And I do think it's important to have authored and passed resolutions around culturally responsive curriculum, celebrating traditions and holidays. But at the end of the day, like if we think that we don't want to replicate models of indoctrination, right? Because that in itself is not helping our students critically think and analyze. So I really think it's important that, however small or big you think your network is, like, are you keeping in contact and making sure that the people in your life are well? Because I think isolation is a prime condition to be able to be targeted, to find people reaching out and connecting with you and then ending up in really bad places that aren't, community, but more like mind control, right? So we can't move away from that when we're trying to combat these things, and recognize that if the target is around some of our lasting institutions, why then is it important for us to be involved in local schools? Why is it then important for us to be involved in libraries? Because if we lose those institutions where we can meet and convene or share ideas, right? Like, the algorithms and everything else are quite powerful nowadays.
They are, and something very similar sadly happened to my own mother. She got older, and she was had the TV there all the time, and you start to absorb toxic things. We have, look at this. I have a 52-card deck of questions people are excited for. Stop writing me questions. Go eat some food. Let's run through a few of these, if you may, and let's make an effort to actually create and broaden community. I think a lot of our pro-community institutions, universities, libraries, public schools are under attack now from hate-filled ideologues. I've seen a rise of that certainly over the past decade. So, is there something we can do if we're worried about school curriculums excluding inclusive materials? And also, let's add to that, what if we don't even have kids yet? How can we advocate? Like, I hope to have kids. How can we advocate? Is there any advice?
Well, first of all, you don't have to have kids in order to attend your local school board meeting and to vote. Those are two really important things. And I'm blanking on what else was part of the question. It was multifaceted.
Well, what can we do also if school curricula exclude inclusive materials. For example, the Muskego example, and there was one tactic that could be done. What are some tactics for us?
Great, thank you. So another thing that you can do if you reach out and connect with your really superintendent, director of curriculum, school counselor, those are all good points of connection. First of all, you can ask. Approach with curiosity. You can offer to connect them with your local community group because hearing from the community themselves is really important in centering the community in the history and curriculum that's being taught. Making sure that libraries are reflective of our full community. I love this quote from Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who's a professor of education, that books should be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors so that kids can see themselves in curriculum, they can see other communities and learn about other people and their backgrounds and identities in books, and even enter in terms of empathy through sliding glass doors. So those are a few different starters.
Great suggestions. Anybody have something else to add, or this person cheated? They wrote like 5 questions on one card.
I'll say specifically if you're a Milwaukee resident, Milwaukee Public Schools is currently going through a strategic planning process, and I think they've already had 3 different listening sessions around that. So there's one tonight at Manitoba School, which is off of 40th and Forest Home. And then there's one on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. at Central Office. So they're going through sort of the draft. They did surveying around this. They've been talking about it at the school board meetings. I know in Milwaukee there's a lot of school board meetings, so you might not have caught them, but there are opportunities to get involved directly, to Andrea's point, like with the school board. I also think that to go back to, I think, my first point, like curriculum doesn't really matter if kids can't read. So I feel like every time I'm on a panel, I use my privilege to say go teach a kid, go tutor, talk to your nephews, your nieces, but it's, our kids need as much help as that they can get. So if you don't have kids, I'm sure there's somebody that in your network that has children that would love an extra tutor.
I'm happy to lend out my children.
Or reading, so.
All very good advice.
I think also, I think that's very good advice as far as we kind of sometimes forget about who are the practitioners of this learning, and as far as teachers, you can support teachers in what you're doing. You don't have to necessarily just go for school board members or elected officials. Just being able for teachers to be able to have access to diverse materials, to inclusive type of literature, to things that they can share with the students, that's very important, and that's not going to necessarily go from top down. Just talking to a school board member or the principal of a school is not going to necessarily get materials to the classroom teacher. And that's where you can really make an impact too.
Mm-hmm. So all of you spoke about the importance of interconnectedness, celebrating our diversity, celebrating our differences, reaching out across lines of difference, either with curiosity or with comradeship. What are your thoughts on African American studies being stripped from school curriculums, and does teaching African American studies also, and assisting that cause, also help your own causes?
Of course it does. If we're a community, African American studies are part of us too. If we're not learning that, it says African American. Why do you teach a certain part of the American story, but not if it has African in front of it? It doesn't make any sense. And I think that that's one of the biggest, I don't know if there could be another article to the article, that we make all our histories mandatory in schools because it's American history. It's part of the American story. You cannot just pick and choose what part of history you like. It's one and the same, and I'm looking straight at Reggie, who's also been multiple times one of our esteemed facilitators in the Repairing Together program. I remember that the first time I met him, fresh off the boat almost, and Reggie started explaining about Milwaukee, and he wasn't planning on it, but I was asking questions, and we sat for 2.5 hours. I still feel a bit guilty about that, but I learned a lot. And I think our students and our people deserve to know the full story. They miss out on all the richness and all the accomplishments because we focus on the negative, but we miss all the accomplishments, all the positives, all the things we could learn from. And that's just a shame.
I would say one point is that we absolutely care about African American and Black history. We have Jews of color that are part of our community, so this directly impacts them. It's such an integral part of the founding of the United States. I mean, how do you not teach that? And our kids also learn. You don't need to mention African American people in order for kids to be learning about African American people. There are messages coming all the time just by turning on the news, by watching TV, watching movies. Kind of back to your last question, one of the things that I've tried to do as a parent is to, as we watch TV, or movies or whatever, help to point out and articulate some of the stereotypes and the tropes that are shown, and have that be part of everyday conversation, because they're learning from that too. And if we don't talk about it, they're going to learn harmful messages.
It's like you saw the other index card in my hand. This was specifically about that. I'm impressed. And I'm assuming you all agree, a part of our education is not just seeding new information, but also confronting lies and confronting tropes and confronting manifestations of violence and stereotypes that we see in media, because most of us use social media or commercial media as a primary food source, right? Think about the last time, informally ask people, when was the last time you sat down and read a book or took the time out to digest something more than whatever is presented to you by an external organization with some sort of agenda. Another question, too, here, and this is an interesting one. Are there educational presentation or curricula that any of you have in your organizations or schools about also addressing microaggressions? And maybe if somebody wants to help define microaggression for folks in your answer. I only know macroaggression.
I'll take a stab at that in the sense that I think you cannot address something like, if I understand the interpretation of microaggressions, without addressing some very basic macroaggressions. I think we as Americans need to confront the fact that slavery is our original sin, as is the genocide of indigenous people, as if there's a long list of things. You can't understand some of the injustices that happened without understanding that fundamental type of thing. So I think the concept of, I've always felt that you can't really understand microaggressions without thinking of some of the macroaggressions, and that's about as basic as they come.
I'll take a stab at microaggressions. I think microaggressions harm marginalized people, identity groups. They're not overt, use of slurs, but they are the use of tropes. I can give an example from from one of the things I've heard from our community. You talking to a Jewish person or in front of a group of Jewish students, Jewish people are all rich, very good business people, so we need to, this is something we want to talk about. It might sound like a compliment, but it actually is a very harmful trope that is not true about, the Jewish community is also diverse socioeconomically. So it's really some of these kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts. They're truly harmful, and they've been, I can't quote exactly the study, but I know there's been research on the impact on stress, particularly for African American people that experience microaggressions like on a daily basis.
So we have time for one more question before we do a bit of housekeeping and promote a couple of other forward events. But so I thought I'd end with a nice question from the audience, which I think we can use as kind of an inspiring charge, which is, what are some ways that we might be able to promote solidarity or unity between us? Simple, tactile, you can do this today.
First of all, you're all here, either online or in person, so you've already done that for today. I would encourage you, those who are here, please introduce yourself to one person that you don't know, that you've never met before, after the program ends. That would be great. That's a place to start.
I would add, if you're not involved in some sort of, I would say, like two different ways of thinking about community. There's communities of care, so the people that are filling your cup, that are making sure that like you are well as a human. Take time to think about like, what is my community of care, and then I'll also say sometimes these are overlaps, sometimes they don't. But like, what is your community of like organizing around power? So I think. Something that we talk about a lot within the Office of Equity is like, where is power at play here? Is it positional? Is it based on influence? Is it based on resource? What is it being built? Like, who is it for? And then who's paying attention to make sure that the intended, outcome and beneficiary is actually being benefited, right? But like, how are we always thinking about, and then not just thinking about, but organizing around power. So I think I unintentionally gave like 3 things to do.
That's great.
In terms of change your thinking and then join 2 groups.
I also learned community of care from you. I didn't know that phrase.
Yeah, here you have a lot of community efforts to volunteer at whatever level is your comfort zone. And that's in your own backyard, so that's perhaps a bit less of an obstacle to hop over. But in my little village, there is a lot of opportunity to help out with the community. And with the students, we do sometimes projects that they want for the community, but we always want to make sure it's at eyeball level, that it doesn't come from, look what we're doing for the people who have less than. No, that's not. You look people in the eye and you show everybody the respect they deserve to be seen. And that can be as small as volunteering.
I think that, and what everybody has touched upon, so I don't want to sound real redundant, but, and a shout out to the Milwaukee Film Festival, which is going on now. One of the films that I did see was one called Join or Die, which talks about the need to actually engage in a variety of different activities with other people and actually to talk to other people. You can't understand another person's experience unless you've done something to share in the experience themselves. So, and I think also about, I was just reading, I believe it was in the Washington Post yesterday, they were talking about a study that shows the biggest contributor to depression, anxiety, everything among kids, and they studied this longitudinally, is really screen time. Once you start only talking by screen and not talking to a person, you're not really talking. It simulates the experience. It's not a substitute for actually getting to know somebody and looking them in the eye and saying, this is why I feel like this, how come? What is your experience with the whole thing? And I think that's very important. Some of the kids in the study there, and this is pre-pandemic too, were averaging 7 hours a day on their phones and screens and other things like that. You can't be talking to a human if you're talking to a machine, even though you think you're talking to a human through a machine. So I would say the more that you can actually join or talk with other people or just converse and get some common experiences, I think that's something that you could do right now.
Can I just add one last little thing? So one of the things I learned from, this came from out of the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, the difference between intent and impact, and how it's really important to think about and listen to how people are impacted regardless of what intention was. So you don't need to intend to harm somebody with your words or your actions in order for the impact to be harmful. So we really need people to be listen to how a system or a policy or a phrase, listen to how that impacts people that are centered there. And if, when we feel our defenses come up, that's a key, that's kind of a note to pay extra attention and sit with it and believe people when they tell you what the impact is.
Thank you, friends. So this was fantastic. I mean, for only our second ever hybrid forum here, I think this was great. We're very lucky to spend this time with the four of you. We have a few announcements for upcoming opportunities that you can all participate in before we all applaud raucously for the four people to my right. We're excited to announce a tour and program talk at the Jewish Museum of Milwaukee's exhibit Degenerate, Hitler's War on Modern Art. That's in partnership with the JACL of Wisconsin, and the Turner's participation was sponsored here by Art Heitzer. We'll also have a lecture with Dr. Sandra Gilman, who will discuss race, degeneracy, and eugenics in the late 19th and 20th centuries. And you could email events at milwaukeeturners.org to attend. If you're a Turner member. No. The Milwaukee Turners are also proud to co-sponsor an event on Wednesday, May 24th with the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center and the Milwaukee County Historical Society Propaganda Over Pints, the role of beer halls in the Nazi rise to power. You can register at holocaustcentermilwaukee.org. /events. I just want to also illustrate that the Milwaukee Turners were one of the first groups to ban Nazis as members in 1937, 4 years before World War II, or before we entered. And I'm bringing that up, I wasn't around then, but I'm bringing that up because I shared that with somebody prior and they didn't know, and so we want to tell our story better too. We're also looking forward to this year's Jane's Walk Milwaukee, and if you're interested in that, you can reach out at contact@Jane'sWalkMKE to get involved. Once again, I'd like to thank our guests here at Turner Hall and on our live stream, our production team, Cheston Van Huss, Mark Soriano, Michaela McLaughlin, and the great folks who co-sponsor the Milwaukee Turners at Phillips Forum, which includes Marquette University Center for Urban Research, Teaching, and Outreach, Wisconsin Voices, the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Center for 21st Century Studies, Rid Racism Milwaukee, the Milwaukee County Office of Equity, look at that, the Hertzfeld Foundation, MICA, and the National Lawyers Guild of Milwaukee. If you're interested in supporting the Milwaukee Turners and our work, please visit us on Facebook or visit our website, milwaukeeturners.org. If you're interested in being a sponsor of the Vel Phillips Forum or seeing some previous episode, you can do the same thing and visit our website. I'm not going to read that again.